So Dennis is going to finish up here, and he's going to give us some information for what we need to know before we hit the fields this spring there. So a few more minutes of meeting here, and we'll get wrapped up.
All right. All right, so I wanted to do this talk, and I didn't know for sure how this was going to go as far as trying to put two farms up here. But I hope what you guys have seen out of this is the kind of information that we generate in this YEN program. And you can have all of that, every bit of data we put up there, you will have for your farm for this growing season. So if you have any interest in signing up for it or being part of it, it's $300 cost. That basically covers all of our lab analysis. If you want to do it, we have our launch meeting this Friday, like in 2 days. And I will get you in the system if you want to do it, but come and see me. If not today, email me before Friday, and I will make sure you get in the system. Because I just think this is a valuable program that I think we all can learn from. And when we start looking at average data up here, we're going to start seeing trends, and we're going to learn even more. So with that, I'll try to wrap things up here. So I've gotten quite a few questions about what is this weather, how is this impacting my crop? From a vernalization standpoint, we've got to have 6 to 8 weeks below 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Have we had that? Yes, we have. Okay, so from a vernalization standpoint, we're in good shape there. And you guys know what vernalization is, right? Vernalization is the cold period that is required so that the wheat plant can transition to from vegetative to reproductive. If you don't have the vernalization period, it'll remain vegetative for its whole life. If you took a seed and planted it in a pot and grew it in your house and you never exposed it to cold, it'd just keep producing leaves and tillers. It would never have a head. It has to have the cold period. That's what the vernalization period is for. Okay, so do we have vernalization? Yes. What about late planted wheat that maybe didn't emerge? Did anybody have any wheat they planted that didn't emerge? Okay, a couple. So will that vernalize if it didn't emerge? Yes. What does it have to have in order to go through the vernalization process? What's the minimum? It's got to have a sprout, exactly. So was there enough soil moisture there to sprout it? You bet. You bet. So should we expect any vernalization problems even in the late planted wheat? No. Okay. Cold hardiness. Cold hardiness is when it's a response that the plant does, a physiological response that as it gets colder into the fall and we start to go into the winter season and the wheat becomes dormant, there's a change in the meristematic tissue. And the meristematic tissue is the growing point of the plant. Okay, that's where the cells divide, and that's what produces a new leaf, which becomes a new tiller. Okay, so what happens is that early on, there's plenty of moisture in that meristematic tissue. As it gets colder and the days become shorter, the amount of water in those cells is reduced, and the reason for that is so that if it was to freeze, you have less chance of rupture. Because if you rupture those cells, that's your meristematic tissue. That means the plant's going to die, right? Okay? So as it gets colder into the fall, the stem or the meristematic tissue becomes more and more and more resistant or tolerant to the colder temperatures. What happens when it warms up in the winter? It kind of reverses the process, doesn't it? And then, so we had a warm spell, now it's cooling back off. What happens next? Then we get a warm spell. So every time it cycles, it will start to go back and harden off and get, to tolerate those colder temperatures. But every time you go through that cycle, the level of cold hardiness is reduced. So the first time through, you might get down to, 20 degrees Fahrenheit tolerance. The next time, it'll be a little higher. And the next cycle will be a little higher. And the next cycle, it'll be a little higher. And so that's just the cycle that it goes through. I don't think, So where is the growing point right now, today? Where's the growing point in wheat? It's in the ground, right? So we want to worry about air temperature, right? Right? We're worried about the air temperature, right? No.
Only as it translates to soil temperature.
Only as it translates to, yes, the soil temperature is what's important, okay? So we can have fairly wide fluctuations in air temperature, but what happens to the soil temperature? It remains fairly steady, doesn't it? Now, it will warm up and it'll cool off as the temperature cycles from warm to cold, but it has that buffering effect so that we don't get those extremes. Now, you remember back in January, we had a week of really cold weather, right? Okay, what did we also have at the same time? Snow. So what do you think the temperature was at the crown? Did we hit down to the 5 degrees, or that would be what, -20 or whatever it would be in metric or Canadian or Celsius, I should say, sorry. So the snow that we had buffered it. I think we're going to have no problems with cold hardiness. Now, we've talked a little bit about broadcasting and flying on wheat seed and whatnot. If you have soils that frost heave, you will see some winter kill and some damage if you don't get the root system deep enough to root that plant and hold it in. I see that every year. And the grower that you were talking about, I know who you were talking about, and that is the problem. Is he was getting this frost heaving problem, and just the crowns weren't able to survive because he wasn't getting it deep enough. And you want the crown roots. Wheat has crown roots just like corn does. They don't look like corn, but you want those below the soil surface. So if you're planting too shallow and them crown roots come out at the soil surface, you have less ability for that to hold that plant in the ground and tolerate that frost heaving. Plus, it could be a lodging issue later on. So early spring, we'll have to see what's happening. I've already had people say, oh, it's about time to get out and put nitrogen on. I'm like, it's the 20th of February. It is not time to go put nitrogen on yet. So hold off on that. Despite the urge and the warm temperature, everybody wants to get out and get in the cab and go do something. But just hold it off a little bit. We saw some great data from Peter on when we need nitrogen. So we need to think a little bit about our splits. If you're splitting your application, maybe you need to think about how much you're putting on in the first versus second pass. If you're putting more in the second than the first pass, you might want to move a little bit of that toward to that first pass. But you don't need to get out there and get on right now to put nitrogen out there. It's a little too early. Spring management checklist. Get out there and assess the situation. Scout your fields. Walk them. Determine what growth stage you're at. Do you have tillers or not? Conduct stand counts. Dig some. Look at the root system. Do they look healthy? Look for damage, and if you do have damage, quantify it. How much damage do you have? And then from there, you can determine what are the immediate needs that you have, and then think about the future. What are the future needs that I have in the spring as we get into spring and things warm up around here in terms of like disease management and how you're going to manage this crop. To do stand counts, measure 3 feet of row, count and record the number of plants within that 3 feet of row, and then calculate the average number of plants per foot. And you want to do this in 3 to 5 locations. If you do that, I borrowed this chart from University of Kentucky publication. What this has is the number of plants per plants per foot of row needed for 100% of yield potential. Okay, so if you're on a 7.5-inch row spacing, your target is 15 to 18 plants per foot of row. If you're significantly below that, you need to think about what are you going to do with that crop. Do you tear it up and put it to something else or what? So dig plants, because when you dig them up, don't just go out there and walk and look and try to like poke around with your finger and see if you can see if there's tillers. Actually dig some up carefully. Don't just grab a handful and yank, because you'll probably rip the roots right off. Dig them up and break it apart. You want to have a root system that looks more like this compared to the one on the left, or the one on the right here. The root system here is going to be able to provide more nutrients and anchorage and water and whatnot to that crop. So what do you do if you have a poorly developed root system? Well, making sure you get your nitrogen on timely, but making sure you have the stand there also is pretty important. So you got to factor all of those things in when evaluating the crop. I always get this question. Wheat will get this like burned look to it, and from the road it'll look like when you're driving down the road, it's got like leaf tip burn on it. If you go out there and look, a lot of times the leaves are actually purple. It can be caused from a couple of different things. It could be a phosphorus deficiency, or it could be a warm day where you're getting rapid photosynthesis in the leaf, but they're not able to translocate those photosynthates to the root system quickly enough, and you get these buildup of these pigments called anthocyanins, and it makes the epidermis look purple. Okay, that's actually a cross section of what that looks like if you used to take one of them leaves. So you get this buildup of this purple pigment. It doesn't really hurt anything. When it warms up, it usually will green right up and grow right out of that. But if you do see this, make sure it is not a phosphorus deficiency. So pay attention to your soil test levels and then manage accordingly. So this is a great slide that probably, Peter, you might want to look at this and say, gosh, this is a Canadian field on the left and an American field on the right. But actually in this one, the wheat on the left had phosphorus in the furrow, and the one on the right, they ran out, and so they just like, I'm going to finish planting the field even though I'm out of the mix of phosphorus or the map with the seed. They just refilled the drill with seed and went out and planted, and you can see the difference in the spring. Powdery mildew, this isn't a big problem anymore, but it does show up. I think it was 2 years ago I was out in the field, had 2 different varieties planted in the field, and when I walked through one variety, my lower pant leg was gray when I came out of it. It was remarkable. So you all probably know what powdery mildew is. If you have susceptible varieties, be paying attention to that. That's an early spring disease. This is another one, septoria. And this is where if we have a warm, wet spring, that early fungicide that's where this would pay off to make sure you keep these plants healthy. And then we've talked a little bit about barley yellow dwarf virus. It's spread by aphids. So there's, the planting date is pretty important. You want to plant after the Hessian fly free date, but then treat the seed with insecticide. And I think we talked about that as well. So, and then the last one is the rust. We haven't had stripe rust in, I think it was 2016 when we had the last outbreak of stripe rust. That's the middle picture. And we really haven't had a lot of leaf rust or stem rust, to be honest with you. We can find it in our FHB nursery, but we mist irrigate that and then we also infect it with fusarium to get high vomitoxin levels in that. In fact, we can get vomitoxin levels up to 50 parts per million in there. So, and the reason we do that is because that helps us to separate out what varieties have resistance. If we have 2 varieties side by side, one has 50, the other one has 10, there's a huge difference between them. Remember, timing on flowering or on fungicide for flowering is 10-5-1. This is what it looks like in the leaf. The pollen sheds from the middle of the plant first, and then it goes to the top and then to the bottom of the head in terms of the way the flowering occurs. So there's 2 more pictures there of the mid and kind of late flowering. As far as timing of your fungicide application for head scab, if flowering at 10.51, when half of the heads look like this in the field, that's like day 1, okay? Optimum control for fusarium head blight occurs at about day 4 to day 5, okay? So when you see this, applying at about day 4 to day 5, you'll get the best control for fusarium head blight. All right, and then make sure you select varieties that have less susceptibility or greater resistance, if you will. There's no variety that is 100% resistant to Fusarium head blight. Last year we didn't really have much of a problem. The year before we didn't really have much of a problem. I don't know what this year's going to bring. We'll have to deal with that when the time comes. And if you do plant after corn, plant wheat after corn, this is even more important to be paying attention to this, and you probably absolutely want to put a fungicide on if you're for head scab timing or flowering if you're planting wheat after corn. Okay, we have CCA and RUP credits. Do you want me to cover this, or this is the last slide I have, or do you want to cover this, or? All right, all right. So does anybody have any questions for me? Yes, sir. Yeah, Peter's going to answer that. Hang on.
So the first time wheat dries down, the kernel is smooth. When it re-wets, it swells the bran, and the next time it shrinks, it wrinkles. And so as soon as it wrinkles, instead of the kernels fitting together like this, now those microscopic wrinkles that you can't see means that the kernels don't fit as tightly together in the cup. And so you get less kernels in the cup. Less kernels in the cup means less weight in the cup. You don't lose yield, you lose test weight. If you lose yield, it's because the birds eat it, or the deer eat it, or the mice eat it. Seriously, those things happen. So you can lose yield, but it's not, test weight, the loss of test weight is not related to the loss of yield. As you lose test weight, it takes more trucks to take the same number of bushels away. But it's because of these microscopic wrinkles that happen in the seed coat, and every time it re-wets and shrinks, you get more of those microscopic wrinkles, and they get a little bit bigger. And so it just keeps less kernels in the cup. What do you, the half?
The test weight cup.
We call it a half-liter cup, but that won't mean anything here. Anyway, but that is what happens with test weight. Okay.
Why does white wheat more problem sprouting than red?
Because the very best sprout tolerance gene is tied to the red bran. There's multiple genes in wheat that are responsible for basically dormancy, which is what, if you're dormant, you don't sprout. If you're not dormant, you sprout. There's at least 5 genes, there's probably more, but we know of 5 genes. One of those genes is linked to red bran. And that's the best gene in terms of maintaining dormancy. So you can have all 4 other genes in a white wheat, and the red wheat with only 1 gene that's tied to the red bran still won't sprout as badly. If you get a red variety with that gene and the other 4, it takes a long time for it to sprout. If you get a white wheat that has no genes for dormancy, then it sprouts the first time the bird poops on it. Right? So, but that's why that 1 gene is tied to the red bran.
And we do testing in our variety testing, and we have a column for pre-harvest sprout rating. And so if you go to varietytrials.msu.edu and go to the wheat variety trials, there is a column for pre-harvest sprout. And yes, the white wheats have a higher, I think their average in the 23 data was like 5.2. So 0 to 9 is the rating. 9 means everything sprouted in the head. 0 means none did. The red wheats was like 2.3, so it was quite a lot lower. Although we do have a couple of red varieties that were running that 4.5 to 5. So there are some reds that can sprout as well. Anything else? All right. If you want to sign up for the end, make sure you see me before the end of the day or send me an email, pennon34@msu.edu. All right.
Okay, thank you, Dennis.